In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And God stepped out onto space, and he looked around and said, "I'm lonely. I'll make me a world." But as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything. It was blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. But God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, "That's good." Then God reached and took the light in his hand, and God rolled the light around in his hand until he made the sun. And he set the sun ablazing in the heavens. Now the light that was left over from making the sun, God just simply gathered it up and rolled it into a shimmering ball and flung it against the darkness, sprinkling the night with the moon and the stars. Now down between the darkness and the light, God simply hurled the world. And then God said, "That's good." Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand and the moon on his left, and the stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was beneath his feet. So God just walked. And where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. And then God stopped and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God just simply walks over to the edge of the world and spits out the 7 seas. Poof, 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 poof. He bats his eyes and the lightning flashes. He claps his hands, thunder rolls. And the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. The little green grass sprouted. The little red flowers blossomed. And the pine trees pointed their fingers to the sky. The mighty oak spread out their arms. And the rivers flowed down to the seas, and the lakes cuddled themselves in the hollows of the ground. And God smiled again. And the rainbow appeared and cuddled itself around his shoulders. Then God raised his arm and waved his hand over the land and over the sea. And then he said, "Bring forth. Bring forth." And before he could lower his hands, fish and fowl, beast and birds, swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forest and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, "That's good." Then God walked around, and God looked around at all of the things that he had made. He looked at his sun. He looked at his moon. He looked at his little stars. He looked at his world and all of its living things. And then God said, "I'm lonely still." Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. And by a deep, wide river, he sat down. And with his head in his hand, God thought, and he thought, until he thought, I'll make me a man. And so from the bed of the river, God scoops the clay. And by the bank of the river, he kneels himself down. This great God Almighty, who had lit the sun and placed it in the sky, who had flung the stars to the farmost corners of the night, and who had rounded the earth in the palm of his hand. This great God, toiling over a lump of clay until he formed it into his own image, and into it he blew the breath of life. And man became a living soul. And God said, that's good. Amen. Amen. Amen.